Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Pauline de Wilde, and I will be your host today for the Starter Motor Project webinar. We're about to start in 2 minutes, so please grab a cup of coffee and we'll be right back. Ik hoop dat ik een seintje krijg. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, at the Starter Motor Project webinar. My name is Pauline de Wilde, and I will be your host today. And of course, in these days, I'm moreover the online moderator. And actually, to be honest, we were planning on meeting in real life to get informed, inspired, and motivated about this project. But now we're pleased to announce that we have a great online program for you lined up. And this webinar will be interactive. You can post your question in the chat, and those questions will be managed by my own sidekick of today, Robin van Leijen. Robin, welcome.
Thank you.
How are you doing?
Very well.
Good. And maybe it's nice to see how interactive we are already, how connected we are. So if you can post a question in the chat, and for me, if you can raise your hand so that we here in the studio can see that we are connected. Please raise your hand. Are we connected? Yes, yes. We got some hands. And please raise your hand if you're looking forward to the next hour. Now we've got some more hands. Yes, good, good. Okay, about today's program, I'm happy to announce that we have with us the head of cabinet of Frans Timmermans, Diederik Samsom. Diederik, I already see you on screen, of course, who has been involved in the Starter Motor project and now plays a key role in the European Green Deal. Besides Diederik Samsom, I would like to introduce to you here with me in the studio Martin van Rijn, president of Aedes, and Ron Wit, Director Energy Transition and Public Affairs at Eneco. They will present the starting engine framework on behalf of the participating heating companies. And after each guest, we will give you the time and the space of posting your questions. So please do so, because today is really the moment to get really involved and be informed about this great project. Like I mentioned before, we were planning on a work visit to give you the feeling on this starter motor project. Where are we at the beginning? Where are we right now? What will be the future? But you know, we are a creative and flexible country, so we made a movie for you. Let's take a look.
In de bebouwde omgeving kan een warmtenet een goede oplossing vormen om woningen collectief van warmte te voorzien. De aanleg van een warmtenet is echter een omvangrijk project waarin veel partijen een rol spelen. Daarom hebben woningcorporaties, gemeenten en warmtebedrijven nauw samengewerkt aan het startmotorproject. Hiermee kunnen zij samen op transparante wijze warmtenetten realiseren, met oog voor betaalbaarheid, leveringszekerheid en duurzaamheid.
De Green Deal is inmiddels, zoals u heeft gezien, in de context geplaatst van het herstelplan voor Europa na de coronacrisis. En het project wat daarvoor het meest in aanmerking komt, is wat wij noemen de renovation wave. Dus als er op dit moment nou een schreeuwende behoefte is aan één project, dan is het wel die startmotor. Waarmee we grootschalig de kosten kunnen laten dalen van de verduurzaming van al deze woningen in Europa. Het komt dus als geroepen.
Er zijn natuurlijk in Europa ambitieuze doelstellingen afgesproken die realiseerbaar zijn, maar waar heel veel investeringen voor nodig zijn. En de woningvoorraad, en corporaties beheren een belangrijk deel van die woningvoorraad, nemen hun verantwoordelijkheid. We kunnen niet alles, maar we kunnen wel onze bijdrage leveren aan die klimaatdoelstellingen.
De verduurzaming van woningen is niet zozeer een technisch vraagstuk, dat is eigenlijk vooral een sociale transitie. En de uitdaging daarbij is vooral, hoe zorg je nou dat je mensen meekrijgt, hoe je huurders meekrijgt en woningeigenaren.
Nou, ik snap heel goed dat huurders zich ook zorgen maken. Hè? Van, ja, er komen allemaal investeringen in het huis. Komen die van mijn rekening of voor de corporatie of hoe zit het dan precies? En dus is het heel erg belangrijk dat er een transparant kostenmodel is. Wat zijn de kosten en baten, zowel voor de corporatie, maar ook voor de huurders, zodat iedereen kan zien wat betekent dit nou precies voor mijn portemonnee. Kennis delen met corporaties, maar ook met gemeenten, andere overheden, energiebedrijven is cruciaal om tot een goede oplossing te komen.
Nou, wat bijvoorbeeld mooi is om te zien is de spin-off van het startmotorproject. Dus je ziet nu dat de afspraken over de transparante business case die we gemaakt hebben tussen de woningcorporaties en de warmtebedrijven, dat daarvan de gemeente VNG hebben gezegd en het Rijk, we vinden dat zo mooi, we willen dat graag toepassen bij de wijkgerichte aanpak op landelijk niveau. Wat ik het bijzondere vind aan een startmotorproject is dat we beginnen met het verduurzamen van woningen van mensen met de laagste inkomens in Nederland, namelijk dus coöperatiewoningen. Dat is op zich niet logisch, maar als dat lukt, op een betaalbare manier, dan kan het overal in mijn ogen.
Niet alle landen zijn even geschikt om deze aanpak toe te passen, maar alle landen kennen een vorm van sociale huisvesting, affordable housing, zoals dat dan op Europese schaal heet. Niet altijd op dezelfde manier georganiseerd, maar altijd wel met dat ene kenmerk. Eén eigenaar bezit vele woningen en de bewoners hebben over het algemeen geen dikke portemonnee. Die startmotor is dus voor heel Europa ongelooflijk relevant.
Wat heel belangrijk is dat we schaal maken, dus dat we op grotere schaal werken zodat de doelstellingen gerealiseerd kunnen worden en misschien zelfs al wat eerder. En dat er een wijkaanpak is, dat we dat samen met huurders kunnen doen. Want dat is natuurlijk heel belangrijk voor het draagvlak, maar ook voor de transparantie.
Innovatie en samenwerken, dat zijn de twee cruciale factoren waarmee we de startmotor tot een succes kunnen maken. En vanuit Brussel kunnen we daaraan bijdragen, de samenwerking over de grenzen heen trekken, de innovatie nog Europeeser en met Europees geld financieren. En dan kunnen we dus het succes versnellen.
Ladies and gentlemen, in her State of the Union speech, von der Leyen made it clear that the European Commission envisions a 55% target in 2030, a sharp increase compared to the current target. With 40% of the energy consumption in the EU coming from the buildings, clearly building renovation plays an essential role. Everybody is anticipating the publication of the Renovation Wave strategy in October. And there is consensus that investing in building renovation can be an important part of the green recovery, creating jobs and cutting emissions at the same time. But how do you do this without raising the cost for tenants? How can we get support for this from communities? And what is the optimal balance between energy efficiency measures and switching to renewables? And what role can social housing providers play? Key questions for many people involved in this tremendous challenge. And today we will be looking into the way heating companies and the Dutch social housing sector took on this challenge in the Starter Motor project. And so I'm proud to announce, to introduce to you Diederik Samsom, Head of Cabinet of Executive Vice President Frans Timmermans. Mr. Diederik Samsom, are you there? Are you with us? You're still on mute, I think.
He has to unmute me. Here we are.
Welcome. Good morning. How are you doing?
Morning. I'm fine here in Brussels.
Yeah, are you good?
COVID capital of the world, unfortunately. So
Unfortunately,
we
yes.
are we are stuck. But
Yeah,
well, we keep continue to work. Most of it can be done digital,
yeah, which is
although
great.
it gets a bit annoying. But still, let's keep up the good spirit. And once we will beat this virus and see each other in person.
Absolutely. That's. I mean, online is okay. Huh? We can do a lot with each other, and it's great to have so many participants here. But life is a little bit nicer. Um, from the organizers of this webinar, I understand that you were one of the founding fathers of the Starter Motor project. Is that correct?
Well, that's too much honor.
Okay.
I happened to be the chair of the table on built environment of the Climate Pact in the Netherlands, which is a mouthful of title. But indeed, and at that table, the starter motor, starter engine,
Mhm.
the idea for that was born, and I am glad that I could help a little hand.
And in your role right now, what drives you to make the European Green Deal to a success?
Well, it's the biggest environmental project the world ever embarked on, so I couldn't resist this.
Uh-huh.
It is the true and one project to set the world on, first of all, Europe, and then hopefully the rest of the world on a course to a sustainable future.
Mhm.
Not a day too early.
Mhm.
So we are really in a hurry, and obviously we're not really helped by the circumstances of a COVID crisis. But I might be able to explain you that we can even use these circumstances to press fast forward on the Green Deal
Yeah.
and make this project reality.
Okay, yeah, one more question before I give you the floor. If I take a look at this starting engine project, this really looks like a project that holds the Dutch DNA in its essence, decentralized, consensus driven, and based on mutual cooperation. But that's my assumption. You've been in Brussels for a while right now. Huh? Is this really a Dutch way of working, or do we see this in other member states too, and perhaps at EU level?
Yeah, we as Dutch people, we tend to think that we are unique. Every housing corporation also tends to think that it's unique, and I like that, and
Let's keep
let's
it that
keep it
way.
that way.
Yeah.
But the reality is that the Dutch DNA is much alike the European DNA, and
Okay.
all over Europe, these projects are possible. And actually, in many parts of Europe, similar ideas are now starting to grow. You see it in Vienna, you also see it in Sofia, you see it in Madrid, all over Europe. You have those circumstances in which a starter engine, a large scale renovation of houses can be implemented. But to be fair, and the honors to the Dutch, the starter engine from the Dutch Climate Pact is still way ahead of the rest of the pact.
Okay. Well, Mr. Samson, take it away. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, I will just give a brief introduction and then open the floor for questions. And first of all, I'm happy to see Ron and Martin there, who I know from, well, various pasts. Um, Reminds me a bit of the song of Vera Lynn, We'll Meet Again. And here we are meeting again, well, in digital circumstances. But indeed, when we started the ideas about a starter engine, that was in the context of the Dutch Climate Pact, and specifically the part of the Climate Pact on the built environment. I happen to be the chair of that table with all kinds of dedicated people working towards a sustainable built environment. But from the beginning, it was obviously clear that if you wanted to make a difference in the 7 million buildings in Europe, in the Netherlands, you needed to start with those 2.5 million buildings that are owned by social housing corporations, because that's where the scale is. So from the start, we've been contemplating, thinking, brainstorming, negotiating on how to make this idea a reality. And the ingredients are clear. Um, you need renovation, yes, but also you need sustainable heat. You need to coordinate the projects to create the largest possible scale. And most important and most difficult, you need to convince the people living there, people with not a big income most of the time. Also, people who are not busy with climate change every minute of their day because they think their life is pretty complicated without me intervening on climate change all the time. So that's where the real challenge is. And I actually hope to hear from you how far you got with that, with solving that challenge, with cracking that real nut, because we could learn from that. Because, well, to be honest, I left you in the midst of the project. That was in July 2019 when I got a phone call from Commissioner Timmermans, who told me that he was going to be the new commissioner in the new commission starting in November with the task to develop the Green Deal. As I said, the biggest environmental project a continent ever embarked on, with an ambitious goal to put Europe and the rest of the world on an irrevocable pathway to a sustainable future. I couldn't resist that, so I took up my life and left to Brussels, only to discover that part of the Green Deal is obviously renovating not 7 million, but 210 million buildings all over Europe, most of them badly insulated, almost none of them having renewable energy as an energy source, nor for heat, nor for electricity. So quite a task ahead. And to press fast forward on the story, we presented the Green Deal in its general outline and promised to work on every aspect of it in much more detail. And before we got there, Corona entered our lives and turned our lives and the world upside down. And I must admit that at that point in time, I started to get a little desperate because it felt like Groundhog Day.
Mhm.
I've been there before. I'm old enough to remember that a vice president of the US walked into Europe with a movie in his back, An Inconvenient Truth. And he mesmerized the whole of Europe. I remember the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Balkenende by then, writing a letter with the then Prime Minister of the UK, Tony Blair, urging their fellow leaders of European countries to take on this enormous task of fighting climate change. And ambitious programs were developed and all kinds of ideas were launched. European summits were convened, and then Lehman Brothers fell. And the world entered into the financial crisis, and we haven't heard a lot from that Inconvenient Truth movie again. And now here we are, just before the start of the Green Deal, and Corona enters our lives. But this time is different, luckily. Due to many circumstances that I will not elaborate on, we are now in a situation that a Corona crisis, an urgency, something that takes away all our attention, doesn't push the climate objective away, but actually brings it closer. Because we now have the job to recover from this crisis, which is not only a health, but also an economic crisis. And what better than to build back a green society? If we want to recover from this crash and rebuild our economy, we better do it right, instead of building up the old stuff and then starting to green it again. And luckily, we were able to convince almost everyone involved, and we've now pressed fast forward on the Green Deal in the context of the recovery plan. But it's not that simple to just take the Green Deal plans off the shelf and say, hey, you were looking for an investment plan, don't look any further. Here it is. We had to change it a little, or a lot, to adapt it to the current situation. And here's where the renovation comes in. Because the adaptations were obviously clear. What we needed to do is put every part of the Green Deal that delivers on jobs and growth fast now, to put that front and center, because that's what the European society needs, jobs and growth. And I looked in the catalog of Green Deal projects, and obviously one was standing out. It's called the renovation wave, because if we now start retrofitting 210 million buildings in Europe, and we do that fast, we deliver enormous amount of jobs and also economic growth, while at the same time providing the owners or the people living in those houses, providing them a lower energy bill, which is useful in times of diminishing purchasing power. So we have an excellent opportunity here to combine the need for a fast recovery with a need for a sustainable future. And the combination is made by the renovation wave. That's how we call it in Europe. And obviously, we're looking for starter engines for the renovation wave because retrofitting 210 million buildings, well, you can start with one and then do the other one and walk your way through it, but that will never work. We need a cost curve with a spectacular cost reduction. We need scale ups that we've never seen before in terms of mass retrofitting. We need approaches to convince the people living in those houses to join on the project. So we need social innovation. We need financial tools because the corona crisis also evaporated loads of the balance sheets of private companies. So public investment is needed. And we need good examples. So here I am looking at you for help. Because as I said before, the starter motor of the Dutch social housing companies and the Dutch district heating companies are way ahead of the pack. You can set the example. You can show us how it works. And in return, let's make a deal here. In return, obviously, Europe is standing ready to help with financial help, but also with technical assistance. And obviously, with the opportunity, the task, and the challenge to spread this idea all over Europe. Because as I said, they're working on this in Madrid or in Vienna or in Stockholm or in Sofia or in Athens and also in rural areas. And we are standing ready to provide them with the best possible ideas. And who knows, somebody in Vienna thinks of something that you can use in the Netherlands. So let's make this a truly European project and work on this together for the next few years. You start today. We will publish within a month. I have to be a bit more covert about the real date, but within a month, the European Union, the European Commission will bring out its plan on the renovation wave. And as of then, we embark on a joint journey, I think for the next decade, to make this happen. Thank you very much for this. I'm looking forward to cooperation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Diederik. Like you said, there are so many countries already also starting with the engine projects. How can we make sure that not everybody is or working on his own island, but that we're really in communication with each other at a EU level?
I'm afraid that's my job, or at least part of my job.
So do you have a plan for that?
Yeah, we always have those plans, but making them work is the real challenge. But no, in all seriousness, I've gotten to know Brussels now for almost a year, and I'm impressed by the amount of knowledge that is working here, the amount of commitment, and the coordinative power. Because coordinating 28 and, well, unluckily now 27 member states, well, we've been doing that for a while, so we had some practice. So
Nice.
I'm optimistic about the abilities to make this work and to indeed share the information all over Europe. We also have all kinds of systems in place. We have our own European Climate Pact, in which all those little projects will be melted together into one project. And part of that Climate Pact is the so-called Covenant of Mayors, in which more than 1,000 mayors are working together. And that's one of the platforms that we can really share our knowledge in, because like in the Netherlands, but even more outside of the Netherlands, mayors play a crucial role in the local community and in the local governance.
Nice.
We have to realize that as soon as a family somewhere in Bulgaria wants to renovate its own house, the last person they are going to call is me in Brussels. The first person they are going to call is somewhere in the neighborhood, a construction worker or a bank. And that's where local action should take place. We can coordinate that, we can help that. In the end, it needs to happen on a local scale.
Yeah, think global, act local. Robin, do we have some questions for
We do.
Mr. Diederik
We
Samson?
do have some interesting questions from the chat. And
Good.
I will start with the International Union of Tenants. And the question is, housing cost neutrality should be the main principle of the European Green Deal, as renovation cost can be passed on to the tenants, which can lead to evictions. And how can we prevent that, Mr. Samson?
Yeah, that's where finance comes in. Well, actually, not only finance, but the combination of finance and cost reduction. Let's assume for a moment that cost reduction will be taken care of by you, by the energy companies, by the construction workers, by the social housing companies, by scaling up, by innovation, etc. So cost reduction is key. But even then, you need finance because a person living somewhere cannot just renovate its own house and pay the bill up front and then wait 20 years for it to be paid back via a lower energy bill. And the same goes for tenants, obviously. If you rent a house, somebody else has to pay for the renovation and the retrofitting of it. That can be paid back. As I said, there is a sort of a business case here, although it's very slow and not completely profitable. But Europe is now preparing itself to help with financing that, both in terms of loans, but also in grants. Where there's no business case, there should be grants, obviously. And well, I shouldn't say the good part, but one of the consequences of the corona crisis is that Europe did realize that we need more public money and public investments. So we put together a package of 750 billion euros called Next Generation EU, which was launched last summer and which will be operational as of the end of the year. And I expect that quite a lot of that money will be spent on this project.
I have
Okay.
another question from Sorka Edwards from Housing Europe, which actually relates to what you just said about Next Generation EU. And our question is, how can the EU ensure that part of that 750 billion euro on the table reaches these renovation projects that bring social and environmental change? At the moment, this is very complex with many instruments, and civil servants might get lost.
Coordination.
Yeah, please meet please meet the European Union and the European Commission. Yes, this is a strange beast, but if you know how to operate it, it's actually not that complicated. Indeed, we have that 750 billion here somewhere stuck in this building, and it will be spent via 27 countries. I can't do anything about that. That's how we work. And it actually can be an advantage too. So 27 countries will deliver plans for a recovery of their respective economies. They will deliver the plans to the European Commission, and we will judge and assess those plans and then transfer the money if they meet certain criteria. And the fun part is that in writing up what kind of criteria should be met by those plans, we put the renovation wave front and center. So actually, we implicitly or almost explicitly ask every of those 27 member states to deliver a plan in which renovation of houses is put front and center, is made the priority. And then obviously we disseminate the money to national governments, and there the new game starts because national governments have their own habit of transferring that money to local governments or to directly to companies or directly to social housing corporations. But this is the system, and we took care that the renovation wave is one of the big priorities in the recovery package for good reasons, as I said before: jobs, growth, sustainability.
Good. Do you have some more questions?
I have another question coming from Paul Voss from Euroheat and Power. His question is, one of the headline lessons of the starter engine project seems to be that building renovation and sustainable heat supply are indivisible. Will the renovation wave make this clear and move beyond the either or approach?
I hope so. But indeed, that's one of the main challenges. We've seen that before. I've seen it when working on the beginnings of the starter engine 2 years ago. There was a tendency to say, okay, don't bother about renovation. We will just supply enormous amounts of sustainable heat, and here we are, a sustainable built environment. Or the other way around, the people in the Netherlands, but all over Europe who say, oh, no, 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 we're going to renovate up to the point where a house doesn't need any external heat anymore. Zero energy housings, etc. Both are not the best solution. In some cases, they might be, but in most cases, they are not. In most cases, the combination of sustainable heat and a retrofitted home, insulation factor label B, so to speak, in normal language, or European speak, by the way, because the B label is a European project. But still, so a combination of, let's say, sensible retrofitting and sustainable heat is the optimal situation. And that requires a lot. It requires from social housing companies that they do renovate their buildings. But it also requires from district heating companies that they do make their heat sustainable. So also there, the plans need to be in order not to be stuck into gas-fired heat, or even worse, in the rest of Europe, parts of Europe, it's most coal or even lignite-fired heat, and we need to make the plans for that too. And we will pay close attention to that when we assess all those recovery plans from 27 member states. It needs to be the combination of retrofitting and sustainable heat.
Mm. Okay, Robin.
I have another question coming from Sebastian Garnier from AXA Consulting, combining the question about renovation with the discussion about creating European champions. And his question is, I wonder how building renovation package factories could speed up the process and lower cost. Is EU funding available for large investment and create European champions kicked off by social housing?
There is funds available, large funds, and I'm looking, as I said, in almost desperation to the European field of construction companies, universities, innovators, maybe even startup companies to enter this field. Because, to be frank and honest, the innovation in the renovation sector hasn't been too impressive. Some impressive results were seen in the past and also at the moment, but we can do a lot more. And a lot more needs to be done. In the European Union, we have the Joint Research Center, a large research entity spread around Europe over 7 locations. But obviously, we also have the Horizon project, in which multi-billion euros are available for research and innovation. And we need to scale this up.
Okay. Martin, do you maybe have a question for Diederik?
Maybe a somewhat political question. I think if you look at the last decades, we have discussion about it's the economy stupid or it's sustainability stupid. And as you mentioned, there seems to be a unique opportunity now to combine those two, which we discussed about for maybe 10 or 20 years. So it's a new burning platform. Do you feel that that's also the spirit in the European Commission, or do we have to fight for this as well?
No, you're completely right. It's actually the new momentum. It's not completely done yet as a discussion, because I remember vividly when we presented the Green Deal in December last year, pre-corona, seems ages ago. We presented it on purpose, maybe provocative, as a growth strategy, a new growth strategy for Europe. And I got some flack from my old friends in the environmental NGO movement. How on earth can you present an environmental plan as a growth strategy? The two do not go together. So there's still out there the idea, for good reasons, by the way, because in the past they were conflicting sometimes, too often. But now we are in a different era, mostly thanks to technology, mostly thanks to the incredible cost curves, the cost reduction that was created in offshore wind, in solar, in electrical vehicles, that we can indeed combine sustainability and economic growth. And well, the corona crisis even made that more prominent and adamant. So we are now sincerely on this combined pathway, and I hope to be able to stay on that for a while.
Thank you, Martin. Diederik, if we look at the new target, the 55%, how much time do we really have?
Well, nothing.
We don't.
No, we have obviously the target is for 2030, so we have 10 years to get there, but we need to start today, or actually we need to start yesterday in order to make this happen.
Yeah.
We made, because the target is fine, and you write that in, well, it's only a three syllable, five, and a percentage sign, so it's pretty short, but under that is thousands of pages of research that we did in the last half a year in order to show that it can be done and how it can be done.
Mhm.
And in detail, we describe what the power sector needs to do, what the industry needs to do, and also what the built environment needs to do. And here, buckle up, the built environment needs to incredibly step up its effort towards sustainability.
Mm.
So far, the power sector has done most,
Okay.
and the industry has done quite a lot. It's in the built environment and in the transport sector where we need to make the big leaps forward.
Good. So there's a lot of work to do, and that's why today this webinar is very useful and to start and keep up the engine projects all over Europe to combine together. And let's hope that everybody is seeing the urgency that you just mentioned. Thank you very much. Thank you all for the questions, and have a wonderful day and keep up the challenging. Are you going to stay with us? Or
For a while.
okay, good. Thank you. Thank you very much, Diederik. Well, I'm pleased to announce a presentation by Martin van Rijn, President of Aedes, and Ron Wit, Director Energy Transition and Public Affairs at Eneco, on behalf of the participating heat companies. Welcome, gentlemen. Are you ready to take us on a journey, a challenging and inspiring journey?
Well, we had to start yesterday, so I'm
Yeah,
ready. Yeah.
you are ready and in a hurry. And for you guys, please do so. Post a question in the chat so that Robin can give the questions after this presentation. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm indeed very happy to inform you a little bit more about the starter motor project, and especially, Diederik, as you will know, I'm especially happy to do that in your presence because we have quite a unique history together. So, indeed, we'll meet again. You could say in a way that the starter motor project is some kind of energy renovation startup engine. The starting motor is a part of the Dutch climate agreement, which included several sector tables together with different stakeholders. And one of them is the sectoral table for the built environment. The housing approach in this climate agreement consists of 3 tracks. The first one, the starter motor, it focuses on the short term in 2022, and it aims at facilitating to go 100,000 dwellings get off the natural gas. Secondly, we have the district approach that focuses a bit more on the long term, and that consists of municipalities are in the driving seat and have to compose a transition visions to remove entire neighborhoods of the natural gas. And in the third place, we have a governmental study which analyzes whether or not the social housing sector has enough financial means to fulfill all its social assignments, affordable rents, new construction and energy renovation. The conclusion, by the way, from this report is that it isn't going to be easy. The aim of the starter motor is to have 100,000 rental houses natural gas free or ready to get gas free by 2022. It can be done by either connecting to district heating or by individual options such as insulation and heat pumps. Other alternatives for gas are still too expensive. Furthermore, as Diederik said, we do not want to wait for the whole package of the district approach. Housing associations, under the condition of appropriate funding, can act as a first mover and as a catalyst. The sector has the volumes and has the organizational level, so we can be the first mover. In the climate agreement, the sector was responsible for identifying dwellings eligible for district heating, taking care of proper conditions, and stimulating the realization of contracts. The overall majority of dwellings in the Netherlands are heated by natural gas. District heating is relatively new and Dutch legislation is gas-based. A new heating act is in the making and the forecast is that it will be effective in 2022. Basically, the starting engine is bridging the regulatory gap by covering the basic conditions for the transition to district heating. And at the same time, the starter motor is kickstarting the district approach as well. In April 2020, 36 housing associations housing associations, the branch organization Aedes and 5 heating companies reached an agreement, the starting engine framework. More housing associations and heating companies are still joining this agreement. Municipalities, the tenant organizations and the national governments are involved and to support this agreement. A national subsidy program was initiated and so far 85 renovation projects have requested for funding since May 2020. And during the negotiations of the framework, issues such as market organization and sustainability level of heat source were left out of the scope because these issues will be arranged in the new Heating Act. I think, Ron, you will take over from now.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I will take you into the 4 most important agreements of the framework. The first one is that already mentioned by Diederik Samson is that we have to focus on scale. And the best scale we can find in the Netherlands is of course the housing sector, the social housing sector, very well organized. And we agreed that within that social housing sector, we could start in cities where already there is an existing heat network. In that case, we can also, we can start with a low-hanging fruit, which is relatively, the costs are relatively low. It's also important because then we can learn in advance of the start of the district heating approach, which will start probably after 2022, because legislation is needed for that. A second important agreement is that we agree that tenants will not pay more than a gas bill at the moment they switch to the sustainable heat option. And that is really important because of the support, getting support among tenants for this project. The third one is also very important. That has to do with trust. Probably, as you know, that if you want to renovate all those houses in Europe, you need trust among all stakeholders, and not at least, of course, among the tenants itself. And that means that we use a transparent business model in which all stakeholders in the project, at project level, get insight in all costs and benefits, and they can also think about how we can reduce those costs. And the last agreement was that in the surrounding, in the neighborhood of the social housing housing stock, where we connect the district heating, we also want to offer the private homeowners in the same area the same attractive offer in order to make scale and also to reduce the average cost of the project. Second, following slide, please. I go down into a little bit in the last 3 agreements. First, the cost neutrality for the tenant. As I said, we need broad support among tenants, and therefore we agreed to leave out the tenants out of the negotiation between the heating companies and the social housing sector, by agreeing that they will not pay more than a gas bill. The division of the cost we agreed on was that the tenant pays the gas bill, or similar to the gas bill. That is a part of the variable cost, but also a part is because of the fixed cost. For instance, the cost of the heat network, similar to the gas network. The housing corporation pays a part of the fixed cost and the one-off connection cost for the heat network. And the government said, well, we want to achieve cost neutrality, so we add a small subsidy to a maximum of 30% of the one-off connection cost and some changes within the building itself. So again, division of the cost between the one hand the tenant, the other hand the housing association. And I think important to note is that we agreed that the project cost should be based on a cost price plus basis. which means we together, on the basis of the transparent business case, we agree on a reasonable rate of return. And reasonable rate of return must be enough for the heating company to have an investment certainty on the one hand, and on the other hand, that the price for the housing sector, the total cost for the housing sector is reasonable. Go to the next slide, please. It is the second important, as I said, is the transparent business case model. That's about trust. So that the key question before we started it with this project was by the housing sector. How do we know that we do not pay too much if we connect to a heat network? And also the municipalities wanted to know that, but also the government who provides the subsidy want to know, how do I know that the project is efficient and that you do everything to reduce cost and to reduce risk. And as you probably know, the district heating market is a quite risky business from different point of view, because of other techniques, because of switching people, because of economic crisis in the housing sector. So there are many risks which can reduce or increase the cost, the risk, and therefore also the tariffs for the tenants. So we need to sit together, and we did that at project level, to look together what are exactly the cost and the benefits and the risk, and how can we identify measures to reduce those risks and costs. And you already see in practice there are many projects are now underway, and we see that by doing that we find already quite huge cost reductions in the projects. So connection fees are going down, for I know examples, from 6,000 euros to about 3,000 euros for a one-off connection fee, which is already comparable with the cost of the installation of a new gas boiler or 2 gas boilers in the same period. So it becomes very attractive also from the point of view for the tenant. And of course for the homeowner it is important that you get a sort of level playing field, that they know also what are the inside of the project, so you have a very level playing field in your negotiations about the project fee. Well, and of course there is a spin-off of this remarkable, I would say, agreement, because I think there is no sector at all, in the Netherlands at least, with so much transparency on the business case. Even not at the railway sector or the DSO and TSOs. It is quite impressive, I think, that there's complete transparency on the project level. And I would say that this is a showcase for other sectors to maybe to copy that. It's also the municipalities and the government said we want to also use and apply this transparent model in the upcoming district approach. Because they said, well, this is so much useful not only for the housing sector but also for all civil people and house owners. We want to use it as well. And the third spin-off is that in the Netherlands, the government and the supervisory authority for the market, ACM, is looking at a new tariff regulation for the heat sector, because of course it is a natural monopoly, and you want to regulate that in a proper way. And by having the inside information of all those transparent models and the cost and the benefits, they can also develop benchmarks, and then they know better what are efficient costs. And using that information for the tariff regulation, they can also come up with more realistic tariff regulation in the future. And well, last but not least, I will not go into depth into this business case model. It gives you just a sort of good look and feel on this model. And what we do in a sense is we're saying, okay, given a rate of return and given all the cost and the benefits, we optimize the connection cost. That is in a sense what we are doing. And then this is the overview tab of the model. All the stakeholders can see what is happening then, and you can discuss together and identify measures. So I will hand it over now again to Martin. Thank you very much.
You already talked about a bit on the final element of the framework, the connection to the district approach. And to elaborate on the district approach, there is the focus on the more long term. I think the key starting point in this district approach is that municipalities in the Netherlands are required to draft a transition vision for heat connections by the end of 2021. And in these transition visions, they will set out which district will be removed from national gas, in what time, and what alternatives should be implemented. It's a kind of model, a template. It was developed by the social housing and the heating sector. It is not, of course, a static model, because in order to ensure that the started motor will truly kick off start in a district approach, you have to reckon into the circumstances of this specific district. It has to be customized. So the template is developed in such a way that homeowners in other neighborhoods can easily step in, not only the social sector but also other participants. There are a few principles. The principles allow for maximum energy between the starter motor and the district approach. Private individuals will receive the same offer as housing associations in the same cases. The business case can be developed, Ron talked about it already, so that the building stock of social housing provider or for an entire district. So it can be on a small scale or on a larger scale. And the final principle is that housing associations are in principle responsible for the loading risk of their own stock. And that will say that the loading risk is the risk of not fulfilling the amount of dwellings as laid down in the business case. You have to negotiate, of course, about the risks. A few words about the starter motor in relation to the renovation wave. In a few weeks, Diederik Samson talked about it already, the European Commission will publish its communication on the renovation wave strategy. And today we focused on the starter motor project, but we know that a lot of good initiatives are happening in other member states as well, because the social, public and corporate housing associations and companies, they bring in scale all over the place in whole Europe. And the crucial element for both is a successful renovation wave as a green recovery. The key elements for both is finding a right balance between energy efficiency, such as insulation, and renewables, such as installations, operating at the district level, bringing out scale, and indeed avoiding passing the bill to the tenants. The EU can facilitate this by giving us room to do what is best. And of course the EU has to set general targets and intermediate targets, but it is also wise to give some space to the local operators. Compulsory renovation rates directly intervenes with existing strategies such as the starter motor, and they will end up to multiple plans with multiple costs. So that will be an unnecessary burden. And as mentioned before, the strategy in the Netherlands will be that we support the energy efficiency first principle, but insulation is not efficient till a certain level. Diederik also talked about level B. So improving the level of insulation after this point is relatively cost intensive, while the energy savings are limited. So it's recommended to fulfill the remaining demand for energy with renewables. A smart combination of strategies, a differentiated approach for different kind of houses and different kind of districts. And of course, there are remaining funding issues. The recovery package will bring a lot of funding, and I think a successful renovating strategy wave could be strengthened by a more earmarking funding, especially for the building renovation. We are confident that the starter motor project will strengthen the approach of the renovation wave, and we are looking forward to a close cooperation with the EU. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you, Ron. It's very interesting, of course, to hear a lot about the main principles about this starting engine framework. I still wonder how such a project works in real life, and I'm going to talk about that with Emiel Klep. You're director of the Dutch Housing Association Woon Plus. Emiel, are you with us? Yes, there you are. Welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Here, yes.
And before I start, please, ladies and gentlemen, post your question, because after Emil, we have some time and room for questions for Emil or Ron or Martin. And maybe you can mention for who the question is for. Like I said, we want to know what happens when we put this in real life, a project like this. How did you use the starter motor framework, and in particular the transparent business case, in Groenoord project in Schiedam in the Netherlands?
Thank you. Maybe it's good to give a very, very short introduction into Schiedam. Schiedam is a city right in the center of the western part of the Netherlands, in the Rotterdam-The Hague area. So it's very densely populated here, and the neighborhood we're talking about, Groenoord, has a lot of high-rise buildings, which makes it very suitable for district heating. And besides, we're very close to the international Rotterdam harbor, so there's a surplus of heat in this area, and that's why district heating was our first idea, and we're 100% sure that district heating is our way to transform our energy use here in this city.
Okay. And
coming to your
about the project.
question,
Yes.
yes, well, we used the framework in three ways. First, we really needed the starter engine to accelerate the energy transition here. We are planning to transform or connect 6,000 housing units to district heating in a relatively short period of time. And getting a connection of this amount, it's only really feasible for parties if you, investment-wise, I mean, if you do it in a short period of time. So the acceleration was a very important goal for us. Secondly, we used the start motor subsidy we received. We got the good news 2 weeks ago. It's about 2 million for a project for connection of the housing blocks. And this is for us a way to guarantee a very reasonable, a very well-controlled rent increase for the tenants in our neighborhood. We have guaranteed them that we will never raise the rent more than the savings in their energy bill. And thirdly, the starter engine framework inspired us to a very collaborative approach with the other parties. There were other reasons, of course, but we started working together with the city of Schiedam and Eneco in a very transparent way, and that made us share the principles of our respective business cases. And of course, we needed many conversations for that, but that helped us getting along very well, very quickly.
And if we look at those conversations, what are those conversations about?
Well, it's been mentioned before by the gentleman in the studio. I mean, our main issue was how do we develop an effective district approach for the entire neighborhood of Groenoord. So not only for the housing association and my tenants, but also for all the private house owners in our neighborhood. Well, and then we encountered three main issues. First of all, we really wanted to develop a no-regret strategy. And by our choice to start with connecting to the district heating system, we wanted to make sure that we didn't take any measures, sorry about that were too costly for us or unnecessary for the moment. So by connecting to the district heating system, we are in the current year, in 2020, we're also already reaching a carbon dioxide reduction of 49%, which will go up to 70% in 2030. So we are sure that we have to start with this connection to the district heating system before we take any further insulation measures. When I come back to what I heard Mr. Samson mention before, the combination between insulation and connection to the district heating system is essential, and especially the order in which we work. So the second issue that we talked about a lot was when and how do we reduce our heat demand in the future. And we're moving towards 2050. One of the very important things for us is a green source becoming available for our district heating system in the, well, not so far away future. at the moment we have this surplus from the Rotterdam harbor, but we need a transformation on that. And then we will decide how we can get further insulation, or how we can take further insulation measures. And I heard the term sensible retrofitting before in this webinar. I guess that's our next main challenge. When will we start doing that, and to what extent are we free to decide in which way? So, like mentioned before by Mr. Van Rijn, we need some working space to decide how to do that. The third thing we talked about, and the last thing, by the way, I mean, we're taking a lot of, or we're making a lot of effort on how do we monitor the energy use behavior of our tenants, and how do we give them insight in that, in their own energy use. Because we've had a lot of research being done here, and you know that even after taking all these sustainability measures, only 41% of the tenants, they have a lower energy bill because they don't change their behavior. So we also are talking a lot with our tenants on how do you use your house and your energy system after this transformation.
Yeah, it was also what Diederik Samson mentioned, that how do we get them involved and interested and see the urgency of what they're working on.
Exactly. And that's, I mean, it's been mentioned before, but that's not easy. I mean, you have to talk a lot and give a lot of information. So we still have to do a lot of work there.
People want to change, but they don't want to be changed, of course.
Exactly.
But what do you see as the greatest added value of this transparency and of this process?
I think it all has to do with trust and openness. So for us, the starting motor engine, or the starting engine, really required us to be open and have trust in our parties. And it's absolutely needed to get there in the end, because the negotiation processes and all these conversations, they take quite a long time. So the framework for us has been very helpful in establishing this collaborative approach and making it successful, and it has been very successful up until now. So I'm really happy about it. So that's one thing, and then the other thing, well, of course, the money. I mean, we're talking about a connection of 6,000 housing units, which is an investment of about 120 million euros in 8 years of time. And this is not the only subsidy that we applied for, that we've received, but these extra 10% of our total investment is, well, it's necessary to get there in the end. So it's money-wise and it's collaboration-wise, I would say.
Good. So success so far, but still a lot to do.
Exactly.
Thank you for sharing this with us, and you stay with us for some questions, because from Schiedam we go back to the European bubble, right? And we go back to Brussels to see how all this information is received for the participants. Robin, you as my sidekick of today, how does it feel to be a sidekick?
I think I get used to that.
Okay, good.
Get used to that.
Well, we'll probably have more online webinars, so that's good. You selected a couple of questions.
Yeah, I did. I have a very interesting question coming from John O'Shea, asking, is there been a good level of uptake from private dwellings to join with the nearby social housing units to reach economies of scale? I think, Ron, you are best equipped to answer that question. If there's been an uptake of private dwellings. You mentioned that the offer will also go to homeowners, and one of the questions from the participants is, how has that been going? Is there a good uptake of that?
The uptake of the homeowners. Well, that is a very good question. What we agreed on in the framework is that we discussed that with the municipalities and also the branch organization of the municipalities, that if there is a fit in that neighborhood on the technology, but also on the timing with respect to the district approach, then we agreed that the municipality will support the starter engine project as much as possible. Not only by maybe a small subsidy, but also by communication and by others, and it will also be involved in the negotiation process. So they will also try to organize the homeowners. But maybe Emil did it in practice. Maybe he can elaborate on this point also a little bit.
Did you get the question, Emil?
Could you repeat it?
The question was about the uptake of homeowners.
Private.
How's that been going?
Yeah. To us, it was or it still is very important that the connection fee to be paid by the private owners is the same as I pay for all the social houses in the neighborhood, because then we have, as we call it, the best story, because all residents in the neighborhood are treated equally. The main difference is that we are, as a housing corporation or association, I provide scale. So investment-wise, I can take this very big investment, and that's what we're here for. A private owner is confronted with, the need to invest somewhere between 15,000 and 20,000 euros in their own house. So what we said, we're not going to oblige you to do it. That's something that we decided with the municipality, of course. But we're creating we call it a temptation approach, verleiding in Dutch. So the private owners can decide their own moment in which they are ready for the investment and want to connect to the heating system. And I, as a housing association, and the municipality, we are how do you say that? We do a prepayment to Eneco. So we pay the connection fee for these private house owners to give them a bit of space to decide their own moment. Okay. In this way, the project can go forward, and this gives a bit of, like I said, space for the private owners.
Okay. Martin would like to comment on that.
Emil, can you say something about the numbers? Are the private homeowners stepping in, or it's too early to tell?
That's too early to tell. I mean, to be honest, we still receive a lot of, counterpower, and I mean, there's a lot of Dutch people present in this webinar. I mean, we're really talking about getting into people's wallets here. And 15 to 20,000 euros is a lot of money. Schiedam is not a rich city. I mean, we have poor house owners here. So the municipality is preparing the creation of a fund in which they can rent, the private house owners can rent money at a very, very low interest rate, even lower than you get at a bank nowadays. And we're really hoping that this offer of very cheap money and a lot of information and a lot of communication will make them cross the line in the next couple of years.
Good.
On the other hand, it's a classical issue, because if a housing association will renovate its dwellings, then there's also the question, what about private owners? So that's not a new question.
No, and I think it really says again that we as housing associations are very important for the provision of the scale that's needed so much. Yeah. So just to say that again.
Robin.
Yeah, I have another question directed at you, Martin van Rijn. What do you think of prosumer models, where tenants and housing providers form a cooperative owning and provide the energy? So basically the tenants taking matters in their own hands.
Well, I think it's a very interesting issue, because there is a lot of involvement of the tenants in thinking about what kind of solutions are successful. So I think it's a very good approach to have a more consciousness about why this is needed. On the other hand, there's always the question of scale, as Emil has said. So if you could combine the scale issue by social owners, and also more involvement of the tenants to developing their own project, I think then that's a win-win situation.
Yeah. Then you create a really great platform.
Yeah, sure.
Of all the parties.
This is maybe one of the most essential issues with regard to renovating and to make it sustainable in neighborhoods, is that house owners and tenants does not have the feeling that others are deciding for you.
Yeah.
So the people in the neighborhood should have from the beginning a say in the choice and in the independent analysis on what technology will be chosen and how it will be done. And that's of course in the beginning very difficult and it takes a lot of time and it will maybe make it slower, the process, but in the end it go faster. And that means also that the municipality, and I think that Diederik already mentioned the mayor as a very important person, that the municipality not only have to organize subsidies and communication, but maybe also facilitate the democratization of the involvement of tenants and how homeowners from the beginning.
Yeah, the social part is very important to get everybody on the same train. I would like to go, if that's okay with you, Robin, to Kiran Kaf. He is one of our participants. Kiran, hi. Kiran Kaf, can you hear me? You have to unmute yourself. Yeah,
Yes, I can. And
good.
good to be part of the discussion
Yeah,
today.
nice. You are a member of parliament on behalf of the Greens and author of the report on maximizing the energy efficiency potential of the EU building stock. Go ahead. What's your question, and to who would you like to
Yeah.
address it?
Well, look, I would just love to say a few words about a perspective from, I guess, the Brussels bubble, but also from the European Parliament. And I certainly think that the starter motor project on affordable housing through district heating is really inspiring. And it ties into what we're hearing in Brussels this week. Ursula von der Leyen, in her State of the Union speech, she said, our buildings generate 40% of our emissions. They need to become less wasteful, less expensive, and more sustainable. And so, what you are talking about is a project that is doing exactly this.
Mhm.
And also, not just in the Commission, but in the Parliament this week, a report that I was the rapporteur on, maximizing the energy efficiency potential of the European Union building stock, it was approved by a massive majority at the plenary session of the party this week. And I want to talk a little bit about that. But before I do so, I want to refer back to what Dietrich said about the opportunity and the challenge of the recovery plan. The recovery plans won't be centralized by the Commission, but they will happen at a country level. But we need to get alignment between the Commission, the Parliament, and the Council on this renovation wave. And I was really pleased to hear Dietrich talk about the link to innovation and research. And I think there's a huge amount that we can do, particularly Horizon, the Horizon Europe project was mentioned. And even Ursula von der Leyen talked about a new Bauhaus, which can link creativity and sustainability. And I think this is a very creative solution that you have in the Netherlands that can inspire what will happen in other countries.
We are
For
very
me, the great
brilliant, aren't we?
I think you are, but I mean,
Thank
I
you.
think the takeaway for other countries is that you're putting tackling energy poverty at the heart of what you're doing. Yes, you're bringing industry together, you're bringing the different layers of government together. You're also bringing the community, the bottom up approach in, which is, I think, quite inspiring. And given that the recovery plans will have a distinctive national component, I hope that the lesson from the Netherlands will inspire action elsewhere.
But it's actually
Look, just
only one goal. I mean, I made a joke about how brilliant we are, but the goal is, of course, that we do it together, in Europe,
yeah,
like
yeah,
Diederik also mentioned. And do you have
absolutely.
a question, Kiran Kav? Do you?
Well, I guess my question is, how can we translate the lessons from the Netherlands into what is happening elsewhere? And can we take in specifically the way in which you are addressing energy poverty? Can we take that and bottle it and bring it to other places in Europe? Because there is a real danger that this 750 billion will be used for all kinds of things, but will it help the vulnerable in our society? Will it help those living in poor quality housing that is damp and hard to heat? And can we take that lesson from the Netherlands about working with communities, working with tenants, and scale that up to a European European level?
Okay, Emile or Martin or
I
it's a
can say
clear.
something about it. I think first is that it is not only about the content, about our agreements, but it's also about the process. I think we can translate the process, what we did, is together with the sector, the municipality. Maybe the start was the climate agreement in the Netherlands 2 years ago, mentioned by Martin and Diederik. And such a framework as the start, and then commitment of all parties that you want to start such a project as this, and then starting with that project and negotiating about it, and about really discussing the interest of each of the parties is almost maybe more important than the agreements itself. And I think in the end, in every country, in every region, the content will be somewhat different because of the situation, because of the energy sources, etc. That's I think that's important to use that framework of the climate agreement, translate it to projects like the starter engine project, and then have involvement of all important stakeholders. One last comment is that we also decided in the climate agreement to make an analysis, a cost-benefit analysis of all the heating technologies for all the neighborhoods in the Netherlands. And that's also important for energy poverty because we select the technology which is the most cost-effective technology for each neighborhood. And of course, this is not the only criterion for the selection of the technology because people itself are, of course, most important, but it will also help to set the basis for the most efficient way forward.
Thank you, Ron. Kiran, is that something that you can work with?
I certainly think it is. I'm quite excited by this.
Yeah.
And I think the technologies will be different in each member state, but the ability to bring people together, to bring different institutions together, is hugely important. And as
Yeah.
several of the speakers said, we really should have started yesterday. There is no time to lose in this. We've got to bring people with us on the journey. So I think starter engine or starter motor is the perfect analogy. We've got to boost things and move really fast, and that's where I think there's real value in what you're doing in the Netherlands.
Nice, and it's great to see your passion about it and your motivation. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for being with us. I would like to go to Paul Vos right now. Paul, are you with us? Yes, there you are. Hi,
Good
Paul.
morning, everybody. Hi.
Good morning.
Um,
You are, let me
Good
introduce
morning.
you, you're the managing director of Euro Heat and Power.
I am. I am. So we are the voice of district heating and cooling networks in Europe, so at European level. Thanks to everybody for the very rich discussion. So much of the things that I like to talk about has already been said this morning, and it's great. I mean, an old favorite of mine is this concept of the need to find a balance between renovation of the buildings themselves and the supply of green heat. And that's not because we're opposed to renovation or because we would like to maintain artificially high levels of heat demand, but just every piece of research and every piece of practical experience I've ever had with this has come back with the same lesson. It makes a great deal of sense to renovate the building until it stops making sense because it's more cost effective to supply green heat. It was wonderful to hear not only a series of experts this morning, but also Diederik Samson from the Commission make this same point. And it will be really nice to see it reflected in the text of the renovation way, because I think it's so important that we get over this false and unnecessary debate and start talking about collaboration between these two different industries to help solve the overall problem.
Mm.
The second thing that I've enjoyed hearing about is the notion of a district approach. This is also something that we talk about a lot. It just makes no sense to treat each building as though it exists in isolation. First of all, because you miss opportunities to do things at scale. But second, because there can and should be relationships between different buildings. You know, I spent a lot of time working in and around Denmark. And one of the favorite questions that you get from energy planners in Denmark is, does my building have a neighbor? And that's a question worth asking. And it will be great to see this approach kind of normalized. And I think the people on stage this morning have done such important work these last years to develop the concept. It's something I like to talk about in principle, but you guys are doing it in practice. And finally, it's been wonderful to hear so much talk about what I call multi-level governance and the need for coherence across these different levels of governance. Of course, we need a framework set by the EU level, and that's regulatory support and also financial support, as has been said. We need national legal frameworks, but there's a huge role that needs to be played by local actors, both local administrations, so city governments, but also local stakeholders like housing associations. These local actors have so much understanding of the needs of their community, but also the resources available in the community, including heat. And finding ways to bring those two things together is what makes a heat transition possible and as affordable as possible. So I'm really hugely encouraged by this discussion. It feels like we have a lot of like-minded people moving in this direction, and our industry, we really do want to play our part in this. It's
Well, you do, eh? Yeah.
Sorry.
Diederik already said that you do have the great part, and you're actually one of the going up front, huh?
Yeah, it's
In your
been
area.
a good few years.
Yeah.
We've moved from, I think, being kind of marginal to something central. And I want to say that also brings responsibilities for us. The district heating that was good enough in the 80s and 90s won't be appropriate to solve the problems of 2020, 2030, 2050. So we are also undergoing a process of evolution. The networks need to be decarbonized and they need to become smarter and more efficient. So that's what's on our table, and we're happy to work together.
Good. Thank you very much. Is there anyone who would like to react?
Maybe some reaction. I think it's a very wise words, because I think the situation is that we need one, let's say, international EU strategy on the Green Deal, and maybe we use 20 or maybe 100 implementation strategies, dependent from the local government, the local situation, the communities they have. There's quite a difference between dwellings who were built in the beginning of our century and dwellings who were built after the Second World War, because there's a huge different strategy. But again, it's not as new as we think, because if you look at the social housing associations, they are really used to deal with these kinds of questions, because how do you want your renovation strategy in a classical way for your dwellings? That's not a completely another question than we have what's our implementation strategy for green energy. And if you could combine them, you can make scale, you can have a differentiated strategy, you have more consciousness of your tenants. So I think that would be a successful strategy, not to think in one strategy, one European strategy, and maybe 100 kind of different implementation strategies.
And also about the new housing coming up.
Sure.
The new building.
Sure.
Yeah, in the future. Thank you, Paul. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your what you told us. Thank you very much. I would like to Carlos Goldstein. Carlos, you're a member of the Cabinet and Energy Efficiency Advisor for Commissioner Simpson.
Hello.
Hi.
I hope you can see and hear me well.
Absolutely. How are you doing?
Doing good. Greetings also from Brussels, Berlemont.
Thank you. Take it away.
Well, what I can say is that I have a real pleasure of being here this morning, and I regret not having a physical meeting with you, but I'm sure we will in the future. Happy to catch up in Brussels anytime, because we're here sort of locked in right now. What I would like to speak about today is we need three main components if we boil things down: regulation, money, governance. And these should lead to action. And question might be, okay, the Commission came into office half a year ago, a bit more, then COVID hit. And is there still a pertinence to the agenda that we set forward? And I would say absolutely yes. There's a clear link between COVID and the European Green Deal. So the lesson learned, I think, that I personally took away, homeschooling kids, as many of you may have done, is that investing in spaces and livability absolutely makes sense. And another idea that I'd like to convey is that I believe personally that health is made at home. And this is a very important understanding. Hospitals are there to take care when things get out of control, but the majority of effort has to be sort of there every day in people's living environment. It was already mentioned that the greenhouse gas emissions from buildings are a big part of EU's carbon emission budget, But the buildings are also the largest energy end use sector. And this is important because it's such a big proportion, plus there's such a big variability across this. I'd say that the technologies are already there to find the solutions. We've been discussing, for example, about district heating. The bottom line is that whatever way we deal with heating, it has to become more efficient, decarbonized, and smarter. And I do believe also very strongly, that was said by Dietrich, that there has to be a good combination of a fuel switch strategy together with insulation and retrofit strategy. So these two parts of the puzzle need to stick together.
Nice.
And maybe if I can underline one important element that I saw as a running thread throughout all the interventions, that's the importance of regions and municipalities. Dietrich said it, Kieran said it, Paul underlined it, we heard it from the other speakers. So working with Covenant of Mayors, Committee of Regions are working on their own report as well on building renovation. So the engagement and democratization of this process is going to be important. Now we're preaching, of course, here among relative believers and people who know about energy.
Yes.
But if I would speak, for example, to my parents back home, who are not energy experts, you need easy, simple solutions. And I believe that this project is such a project that can help sort of package the complexity of renovation that people discard, they don't want to deal with, into something that is at their doorstep and they're ready to go.
Yeah.
Of course, then you have different possibilities for people to take it up. Do they have the funding? Where does the funding come from? How long does it take? But the bottom line is convenience. And here, this is where we really need the project, the grassroots, also the municipal level to jump in. And I'd like to end with a question, if I may.
Sure.
So maybe if I turn it around, it's been asked before, how can the starter engine help the renovation wave? I turn it up a notch. What should be the ideal timeline by 2030 so we can make this really count for Europe? We don't want the renovation wave to be exclusive in any way. So it will have to target all types of buildings. That's because of the challenge. It will have to target all member states. That's also because of the scale of the challenge. How big can we scale up such projects in 10 years?
And you said we have to start right now, with combining those. They're looking at each other. Who's going to answer the question? Ron or Martin?
Well, I was thinking about your question because if it is a matter of phase or is a matter of energy. Because if you look at the template we made in Holland, it's not a matter of a quick fix. You have to be, what's your transparency model? How is the involvement of the municipalities and the communities? In what way is the transparency of cost is knowledge to everybody else? So I think if you use the model, the process, it can go very quickly. But on the other hand, it depends on people. You mentioned about involving the municipalities and the involvement of the local communities, which is very crucial. And I think they should have enough space to develop their own model. On the other hand, this kind of work, it costs labor hours, it's tough. You have to have a lot of knowledge. You have to have people who are energized by the project, such as Emil. Without those people, it won't work. So if you want to implement this strategy, you can use the template, you can use this kind of model. But let's say national government has also asked themselves the question, how can we support municipalities, local communities and housing associations? What do they need? And then you can speed up the model. And I'm convinced that, I think Dietrich mentioned 210 million dwellings. Well, let's divide it by 10 years. So 20 million a year.
Yeah.
Maybe I can add on this a little bit. I fully agree with Martin. I think if you look at that from the technical perspective or the project perspective, if we learn with this project, we can scale up quite fast. But the crucial item is, of course, support and trust among stakeholders and tenants and homeowners. So that we really need to develop a way of how to involve all those people in a way which is effective. That's crucial. Another point which is not mentioned yet, but we also need a sort of urgency among citizens, among tenants, etc. Why? Because we see in practice, and also studies show that even if you have 100% subsidy of your project, and even if you have finance, only 30-40% of the people are really deciding to invest in renovation, because 70-60% are saying, well, it's not convenient at this moment, or I have to do something else, or I want something else. So there need also be some sort of incentive, and it could be, of course, a government regulation with regard to CO2 pricing, or like in the Netherlands, we agreed that natural gas becomes a little bit more expensive by taxing that. But of course, you have to combine that with income policy, in order to mitigate the distributional impact of that. But it's a whole package. It's not only this project, but it is also government policy with regard to regulations and making it urgent. And in the end, maybe in the end, we discussed that also in the climate agreement, that majors, when they say, okay, in 10 years' time or 50 years' time, this neighborhood will switch from natural gas to a sustainable option, we really closed the gas network. And that's, of course, a very difficult message. And it's not easy for a local politician to communicate that, and I don't do that in the coming years. But in the end, we need also some incentives for the whole package.
But I don't think it's only about incentives. It's also about the good information, like the information, but talking in the language of the target group.
Yeah, it's the whole package.
Yeah. It all needs in one strategy. Thank you, Carlis. I hope you're happy with this question and the answers. Thank you very much. So we go to the final lady. Actually, no, it's not the final lady. It's the first lady that we see on a big screen, Sorga Edwards. Welcome. Good to have you here.
Hi.
You are the Secretary General Housing Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So please go ahead. How are you?
Yes, great. Really enjoying this morning's session. And I think we should drive home again how important the timing is today. We just had this week, as was mentioned by Kieran Cuff, the State of the Union address. And we're expecting on the 15th of October, the publication of the renovation wave. And what was really significant, and I would even say surprising, even for our sector, is that this renovation wave was used as a key example by Ursula von der Leyen, by the President of the European Commission, as a way for Europe to recover, a way for Europe to transform the economies. So I think the timing of today's session is really, really crucial.
Mm-hmm.
And we are waiting expectantly for the publication of the renovation wave, because we still don't know exactly what it will entail in terms of financing, in terms of legislation. So if Carlis or Diederik can share anything on that before we finish up today, that would be great. But yeah, I just wanted to make a couple of points. We heard Mr. Sampson mention that the diversity of the systems in Europe, so that different countries have different ways and different systems of social and affordable housing. And this is very true. And Housing Europe is right in the center of that, because we bring together here in Brussels, we represent all of the different social and affordable housing providers in Europe. There's 46,000 of them locally. But we also work with member states who don't have very strong systems to help put in place the structures and help guide them on their policy making to actually have a social housing system, because don't take it for granted there in the Netherlands. Not every country has such a strong and dynamic social housing system. And Diederik mentioned, of course, that other countries are also innovating, But I must say the starter engine really stands out there as a real exemplary example of collaboration and ambition. And we shouldn't underestimate that. And we definitely will be, we definitely promote that among our network as a way to go. Also keeping in mind the differences. So I think what is extremely important for our sector to also mention is was mentioned briefly by Carlos and also by Kieran Cuff. The housing sector does indeed pollute, so we heard this loud and clear. It's a key source of emissions, a key source of pollution in terms of in use phase, but also in construction. And we are on track to improve that. But we have to keep in mind, and this is Carlos mentioned, it's not only this source of pollution is how we see it. It's a right, and it's in danger in Europe. So we still have a housing crisis in Europe with many people who don't have access to housing. So we have to remind ourselves in this debate that housing is also a necessity to take part in society. That shelter allows people to take part in education, to find employment, and without that, without quality accommodation, people are not included in society. And this is a key message also we want to bring at European level. While the Green Deal is the flagship initiative, we also have another initiative, and that is the pillar of social rights. And I think this is where our sector is really special. We are bringing together, I think Robin mentioned it earlier on, we're at this intersection between social progress, social innovation, and environmental innovation. This message is what we've been getting from our members over these months, particularly during this pandemic, when housing was also the first line of defense from the pandemic and from the dangers in the health sphere. We've been bringing home this message that if we have the right framework and have the right support, we can bring a transition that is not only green but also social. And this is really a crucial message that cannot be forgotten. And I thought it was a little bit missing from Ursula von der Leyen's speech. So housing is not just about the energy transition, but it's also a vital social right. And just a few words again about the renovation wave. And well, it's as you say, it's a blank page. It's a bit of a mystery what it's going to look like. But we think that we can really be a sounding board as a sector as to what works on the ground. We heard in their speech mentions of what potentially could be solutions in the future. So mentions of the hydrogen, the potential of hydrogen, artificial intelligence. Yes, of course, we have to continue our research into innovation, but we have to also look at what's happening on the ground, look at what's working on the ground, like the starter engine, and see what ways the European Union can actually add value to that, and not bring in a top-down new concept from European level, whatever was been mentioned of European Bauhaus. No, we have to work on supporting what works at local level and not superimposing a prescriptive new approach at a top-down level. But I think we go in the right direction. So this is really what we will be focusing on, making sure that the renovation wave actually builds on what works, supports what works at local level, and actually brings an added value, not just bringing new rules and top-down ideas. And we're hoping that on the 14th of October, that message comes through really strongly. Mr. Diedrich said within a month. So yeah. There could be a movement around that date. We hope that message comes through really strongly and that we see an EU communication that is about bringing added value to what's happening on the ground. And we hope that our sector, which is really one of the first movers in, as we see today and in many other examples, gets the vital support that it needs. And then I'll also finish on a quick question, although I know we're following up. So what can really bring an added value in terms of financing, in terms of that 750 billion that's on the table? Maybe to hear from the chairman of Aedes, what, in terms of added value from EU level, from the financial sphere, how can the EU really add value financially to the starter engine and the work going on the ground there? And also to Carlos, if you have any information you'd like to share on what the content of the renovation wave is going to be, although it's not.
I will go first to, first I will give Martin the...
Well, first, thank you very much for your very wise words, but I agree 100% about it, because one of the big issues also in the field of sustainability is how can we prevent widening the social gaps in Europe and each of our countries. And maybe the good thing is that talking about renovation wave by social housing associations or other companies which have social housing high in their agenda, that's in the DNA of their corporation, that's in the DNA of their people. So if we could use this DNA to have a sustainable policy in not on the sustainability level, but also in a social level, then I quite agree with your point. Maybe I just mentioned one of the aspects in this renovation wave is that maybe it's wise to give some earmarking of the budgets, because if you have an unspread amount of money and saying to the governments, do your best with it, try to develop more sustainable models, then there's a big fight in the national level as well. So if you want to enhance these projects, if you want to enhance the energy renewal strategy, I think you need some kind of earmarking of the budget and let it and give some space to the national levels. But the earmarking issue is, I think, very important.
Thank you. Thank you. Carlos, would you like to add something? Final chance. You should unmute yourself. Or can we give Carlos some voice? Yeah, there you are.
Thanks very much. No, just in a couple of words, since there was a question directed right at me on the plans of the renovation wave. Well, in the big terms, it's been set out by the State of the Union address by Ursula von der Leyen. So what are the underlying elements are with the objective to decarbonize buildings over the next 30 years. We'll need to increase the depth and the rate of renovations. And this will need to happen on single building and on a district level. So you see the complexity of different things on the table. So it will need to be a comprehensive strategy. There are different elements on it. The energy efficiency part, renewable energy part, of course, industry part, because we want to make sure that there's enough capacity. This is also part of the discussion today, sort of not necessarily explicitly, but the skills, and we need to make sure that European businesses are in the pole position to really start this transition to decarbonized buildings. So this is sort of the setting up part of things that we can do behind the curtains. But then when the actual stage is open, and the technologies are there, that's when we need the audience, you know, to react favorably to what we have to offer. And I think that this is where you have a lot of power in your hands to help make this happen. And the European Union is absolutely committed to help support it. For example, through one-stop shops, so closer financing, closer to the ground.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Thank you. And thank you, Sorga, for your great words and your good question. Thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is actually, we're coming to an end of this Starter Motor Project webinar. And if I may resume, I think that if we embrace diversity and if we see it as a strength to make this project work, then really the Starting Engine project can serve as a great example. And I think that involving all the parties, but also all the tenants and the people that it really is it addressed to, then we really can make a big step. And yes, we have to start yesterday. Well, that is not possible, but we will start today with this webinar. Thank you very much for participating and being such a great part of it. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Martin. And of course, thank you, our sidekick, Robin. It was a pleasure to have you here. If Mr. Diederik Samson, he is disconnected, well, thank you also for being with us, and all the people that asked a question, thank you very much. Have a lovely afternoon. I don't know what the weather is like with you guys, but we have a lovely summery. I don't know if that's so good for the climate, but for us people, and we're also talking about the social aspect, it's a really pleasure to have a nice weekend up front. Thank you very much, and keep up the good work for the challenges ahead. And stay healthy. Absolutely. Thank you.